Hello, I'm Jessica Samuels, and welcome to episode 5 of A Way Forward podcast presented by Beem Credit Union. As we get started, I'd like to acknowledge that we are here on the ancestral, traditional, and unceded lands of the Okanagan Syilx people. Today's topic is mental health and the holidays, and the disparity between the music, enjoyment, the commercials, the presents, what we should be doing and feeling, and the reality that many people simply are not. Mike, when we get into the last few months of the year, this is where we start thinking about holiday season. Mm-hmm. And actually, there's quite a few backgrounds and cultures that celebrate this time of year. We have winter solstice, we have Hanukkah, we have Kwanzaa, and we have Christmas, which is probably in our culture at this time, what we predominantly see the most. So we're going to talk about the mental health stressors as they kind of relate to what you and I know, and in reference to Christmas, acknowledging though that holidays, no matter where folks are from and any time of the year, can also have some of these similar stressors. And we're going to get into that. First, what I want to know is, what does Christmas mean to you? And what are the stressors that you have experienced or do experience?
Well, I mean, it's really interesting because I look back on my life, right? Mm-hmm. And so when I was young, we celebrated Christmas as a family. So it was, rather, traditional, the tree and presents and hanging out with family and playing games and just having an opportunity to be together. As life goes on, things change, and how Christmas looks now than it did before has changed because of some things that have happened in my life. So I lost both of my parents. My dad passed away 2 years ago, just after Christmas. And so it looks a little bit different that, there's that sense of loss, which gets heightened during the holiday season. Obviously who I spend time with around the holidays looks different. Me and my son, we spend a lot of time together, have friends and that, but, for me, the meaning is around being together, sharing, and having those connections. What that's looked like, again, across the lifespan has changed over the course of time. So the stressors that may have existed when I was younger, look very different than they do today. Mm-hmm. So when I reflected on that question, that's really how I frame it up. Mm-hmm. What about your experience?
Natural. Next question. Very similar. Growing up, Christmas was the excitement in the air and the buying of the presents and putting up the Christmas tree and the food and the time with family and each part of Christmas. The time, the rituals that I had with my parents in even putting up the Christmas tree and all of those things. And when I was growing up, I was very blessed to have a large family around me, extended family around me. So, Christmas was like a week-long affair. And I don't mean the presents part of it and the gifts part of it, certainly the food, but that time together as family, like you just did so many things together. And that's part of what I thought I knew to be Christmas. And then you're right, as you adult and, your situation changes and you get married or you get in serious relationships, recognizing that their Christmas experience is different and really making Christmas your own. So you take a little bit from here and a little bit from there and you really want to make it your own. And then also coming to the realization that some of those things, that I really enjoy, maybe not everybody else enjoys. And, and we're going to get to it, but even that like that togetherness piece, because it's not even, for me, it's not even just the like, yeah, I mean, I can always budget, you know, and I can spend a little bit less or a little bit more on groceries or what have you. But one of the things that really is meaningful to me for Christmas is time with family and friends. And I could literally pack like that whole 2 weeks, the week leading up and the week in between, with just like, let's go do this and let's go do this. And that's simply not for everybody.
Nope.
And admittedly so, it's getting less and less for me as I get older. So the realization, so this will get interesting as we talk about this, not only the expectations that I have on myself, but the implied expectations that I'm putting on other people for their time and energy was a real eye-opener for me in the last few years, probably maybe just around when COVID started. Because, you know, thinking, no, it's okay. You know, you don't have to buy me any presents. No, I'll make Christmas dinner. But then there's these other expectations that I was putting on, because I get caught up in the hype. I love it all. And so that's a little bit of an insight. So then, and we'll just talk about this, is how do I make sure that my hopes and dreams and needs are met for Christmas, and making sure that the people around me have the same. So these are some of the things that that we can all consider during the Christmas holidays. And of course, then there's the conflict piece. And conflict, it's these times when we get together, family conflict is high during these times. I mean, I'm sure you might have some experiences, or you know, I think we all could have experiences of conflict during times that are supposed to be set up as celebration. Yeah.
Well, I mean, you talk about family, and you know, when we look at family, and we look at the context of holidays, there absolutely can be conflict. We look at various population groups, right? LGBTQIA populations whose family may, you know, have rejected them or disapproved them and ultimately like ostracize people from their own family. So, I mean, the context of family, what goes on, conflict can look very different.
Right. Or even if you're in that group and you are not necessarily out to your family because you're concerned about, you're trying to like kind of subvert the conflict. I mean, there's that element of that as well too. And you identified that group and other groups or people who views and values may differ from maybe their family members.
Yeah. Well, and I think for myself, I mean, when I think about extended family, I think the more that gets into the mix, that's where I would have seen a little bit of conflict. And I mean, it was wrapped up in various things. Part of it within my family history was, I'd say, a little bit of alcoholism that existed. And we'll talk a little bit more about holiday merriment, the things that can exacerbate, you know, pre-existing wounds that exist, right? On the one hand, like you talk about wanting to spend as much time together as possible. For some families, too much time together can actually be destructive.
Right. Toxic almost.
Yeah. So I mean, it's important to be, you know, super mindful about that, and certainly have a level of awareness in regards to yourself and what ultimately is most important, and what holiday means to you.
And we're talking about, and kind of the flip side of that, right? So that idea of if you too much merriment or too much togetherness, choosing to be with family, if it's not an accepting environment, either because they are aware of or they disagree with who you are, or your lifestyle choice or your political views or what have you. There's a myriad of reasons why. So the flip side of that can be the loneliness factor during the holiday season, where there are these images of togetherness and jubilant families who seem to all be like-minded and all doing the same thing and enjoying each other's company. But that simply can make you feel more lonely, because you feel like you have to make a choice between yourself and your family, and it can put you in the position of feeling you have to conform to others in order to celebrate.
Oh, for sure. And I think, I was just in the US like a week ago, and it's already started, right? Like the Christmas stuff is going up, and you can just ultimately tell that like it's moving forward. And so there's sort of this idyllic perspective that is shown, right, about what a traditional happy holiday would be. And I think the pressure to conform, but ultimately to live up to that. And I think one of the things that definitely can be impactful as far as mental health goes is comparison. So when you look at your experience, generally your perspective is what you perceive to be the not so great things about your experience, comparing it to an ideal or a model that is shown as sort of the ideal scenario. And I think that comparison piece can be a significant challenge as well, trying to create or like conform or build this ideal holiday scenario.
Right. And create even maybe that gap or that giant sense of loneliness of I think what it is it leads to other questions. Am I good enough? Is my family good enough? Do I have enough money to give people the things that they should have over Christmas? Because we're associating Christmas and the holiday season, again, speaking from which we know, is more is better. More gifts, more food, more drinking, more time together.
Yeah.
And that is how we're supposed to celebrate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that creates certainly a tons of pressure. And when you can't or choose not to live up to that. On the one hand, that can be very empowering to make the decision to say, listen, I'm going to choose to experience the holidays in the way that's most meaningful and impactful for me. And I think that's one of the key pieces around being able to enjoy the holidays and not necessarily falling into the traps or the pressures of more presents, more food, more drinks, all of those things that can come along with that.
And we're going to give some tips of how people can do those, manage those elements, because it's sometimes can be easier said than done.
Oh, absolutely.
Certainly not alone in that assessment when it comes to things for mental health, but I just want to do the more. It's and also too driving this consumerism piece. Like I'm thinking about, we just talked about the impact of the cost of living on our mental health, and we are going into a season like, I've been getting Black Friday emails for like 2 weeks, and I think it's still a week away.
Oh yeah.
And then you've got Cyber Monday, and then you've got Christmas, and the amount of pressure. So we already know, that folks are feeling the weight of the cost of living, and we're going into high consumer season. I mean, this is stressful.
It's stressful. And again, linking it back, there was an article that was released not long after we did the cost of living and mental health episode that spoke specifically to debt. And oftentimes what you see is that holiday hangover, right? The consumerism that takes place during the holiday, the rest of it. Come January, when that credit card bill comes, that's when it hits you, and you realize that, whoa, I've overdone this, and in some cases gone beyond your means ultimately.
Well, an interesting fact about about that, and a commonly held phrase, which is the Blue Monday, which I did do air quotes there, not because folks can feel blue before, after Christmas, any time of the year, and you just pointed out a reason why, but it is actually along the lines of that reasoning why that tends to be one of the bluest days of the year or the bluest weeks. It's because those credit card bills start coming in, and then you have the other things. You're feeling the hangover of maybe not being around family, or overexerting yourself, or overindulging. Yeah. And that overindulging piece is the next part I want to talk about. You talked about your own family experience. I know as an adult, I'm trying to be more mindful of my consuming of not only calories, but of alcohol, and understanding my relationship with alcohol around that. But there's these in the moment celebrations. And there is that, again, I feel that expectation to conform and to partake, and literally the idea of being merry is demonstrated as, well, you can't be merry unless you've got a drink in your hand. And if you're going to all the different celebrations, and then you have your family celebration, I mean, these are times when it really puts the pressure on our mental health to drink, which of course has its impact. I guess there's no other word other than just to conform and do as others are doing. In fact, we had seen one study that came through that says 52% of Canadians are feeling an increase of stress, anxiety, and depression and isolation over the holidays.
Yeah.
And so we know through this podcast that people are already feeling the stress, and we are going into a time when that's going to increase.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go back to you talking about some of your stressors. So how do you manage?
I try to, how would I say, moderate my indulgences. I think when it comes to, first of all, spending money, those pieces, certainly setting a budget and then sticking to it is ultimately something that's super important. I think, again, when it comes to whether it's eating or drinking, having a certain level of awareness that well, that experience tonight may feel good. Tomorrow morning, it may not be as great for mental health. So that level of awareness, trying to moderate ultimately then, what you do. I think it's super, like you say, social, and there's all this going on, and these things taking place, trying to stay within some routine, right? And that is, again, sleeping and getting some exercise, especially if there's some caloric overindulgence is so important. One of the things I certainly as a teenager I did was ski. So I grew up in Vernon, so it'd be go up to Silver Star and those kinds of things. So it's, those are some of the things that I look at and do to try and to manage within that overindulgence.
Right.
Sometimes it works. Sometimes it works well. Other times, not as much. But certainly those are some of the things that I do to try and manage within that context.
Right.
Yeah.
And we're going to dig a little bit more. I want you to say a bit more about some of those elements, but just going to that overindulgence piece, and you were talking about, getting outside and getting active, especially about the caloric piece. One of the things that I've done recently in the last few years is I kind of have this routine where sometimes it's with a friend, sometimes I'm by myself, sometimes I have my dog, sometimes I have a family member, and I just get outside on Christmas Day. So what's interesting to me is I'm a person who likes to get outside most of the time, the rest of the year. But actually, for a number of reasons during the holiday season, a little bit because of weather, but also because it's the holiday season and I'm too busy doing all these other things that I've set expectations for of myself, I kind of, that part of my routine breaks down.
Yeah.
And so actually I make sure that I get outside on Christmas Day, and it has turned into its own Christmas routine. And I cannot stress enough, you know, getting outside and being active, is not going to cure a mental illness. We've talked about the difference between mental health and mental illness, but it does wonders for your mental health.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
If only just because it's minus 12 degrees out and it's cold and you kind of, no, but all joking aside. And so sometimes those little things, and it's not long. I'm not going up and hiking, you know, Knox Mountain or anything like that. I'm going for a walk, getting out of that new normal that you're in because of the holidays and getting back into your routine is a really good thing.
Yeah, it's like you say, absolutely. It makes a huge difference. It's not going to be the thing that's going to cure mental illness, but it is absolutely one of the things that is necessary in order to manage your mental health.
Which we have to do all the time and this time of year. Okay, let's start talking about some of the other things that we want to manage. Let's start with the overarching. What I really see is the overarching one, and maybe that's just my own personal overarching, is that high expectations. So the too great of expectations overall, the perfect holiday. So I feel like if we start there, if we go into with managing our expectations, maybe we can start off right. So how do we manage that as we go into the season?
I mean, I think it's a really interesting question, especially if that's where your inclination is. You know, in preparing for this, one of the things you had identified is like being the perfect host. And how do you work through that? Well, I'm not a great host, so I don't particularly excel at that. Okay. But what I would say in those regards is like delegating, right? You ultimately don't have to do it all yourself.
But what if they don't put the ornament on the tree in the right spot?
Go outside and get some fresh air.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you.
I mean, I think that's important. I think it's also okay to take a step back and maybe one year someone else takes that on, right? And so you don't have to be the center of it all and allow you to play a different role within that. I mean, I think those are a couple of good things.
Some key factors.
And then be clear on boundaries. I do think through all of this, like certainly being aware of boundaries and setting boundaries is going to be important, right? Like we talk about family and maybe where there's challenges and issues with family, the rest of it. It can be, well, it's important and necessary to set boundaries. And that can be things like, you know, where there's historical conflict within families, that kind of thing, is making the decision that maybe this year I am going to sit it out and that's okay. Or I'm going to come over for dinner and that's going to be the line and then I'm going to leave. I'm not going to stick around for the merriment because I know that it might not end up in a great direction. So I think being aware of, being clear of, and setting those boundaries is a big part of things as well.
I'm just going to ask a couple more questions about that because I just realized, you know, can you teach us how to set boundaries? I wonder if there's folks who think a boundary setting is kind of like a negative thing and has to be wrapped up in a kind of an acrimonious conversation. But boundary setting can just be as simple as, you know, well, I can only come over after dinner, or I can only come over for dinner, or I won't see you Christmas Eve, but I'm happy to be there Christmas Day. Like, Is that correct? Like, boundaries doesn't have to be like, don't tell me what to do. Like, it's kind of that the connotation of the language.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think again, that's a great point. Certainly, and this comes from our experience, family of origin, all of those pieces that come with it. So sometimes it can be perceived as being conflict laden, or there's stuff that you're going to be dealing with. Like, if you set a boundary, what's the impact going to be on the other person? To me, setting a boundary is just being clear, right? It's not about conflict and strife. The rest of it is being aware of where you're comfortable, and being very clear on, this is what you're going to do and this is what you're not going to do. It certainly doesn't need to be, nor should it be, cruel or kind. It's a way to take care of yourself when you're facing some of the potential stressors that comes with and through the holiday season.
Right.
Yeah. It's extremely difficult though, because people have a varying relationship with boundaries and what that means and what does it mean to set them and the rest of it. So it's essential. Can boundaries be learned? Yeah, there's tons of courses. We do training around boundaries here at CMHA. So absolutely, they can be learned.
And to use a bit of maybe a cheesy line that we'll see in some of those holiday movies or hear them in the songs, is understanding what Christmas means to you. What are the important parts of Christmas? And I feel like that, and really having a solid look at that, because I think that will help you set those boundaries.
Absolutely. And again, I would move it from Christmas to holidays.
Definitely.
Right. Ultimately, as you identified, there's a number of different religious and cultural holidays that exist. Meaning is important, right? And so understanding what that meaning is, what's most important to you, hopefully is going to create some consideration and some self-awareness around what it is that you're prepared to do and where you're going to draw certain lines to be able to take care of your own mental health and well-being.
Okay. And then when we talked about the overindulgent, we talked about the eating and the drinking and other things. You mentioned something with overspending, and we talked about setting a budget. Again, just being mindful of the state of mind of the cost of living right now. That is a way to manage it. Maybe try not to use the credit card as much, or understand that there's going to be some implications after that. I say that like I don't pull my credit card out at any given turn. But I think there's some other options. So unique gift ideas, gift exchanges, the secret Santas, even within the family, right? Or other things, I know in a time, going back to the loneliness, sometimes the gift of time, one-on-one time with a family member is an incredible gift to give.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then speaking of loneliness, loneliness as it pertains to perhaps grief or significant events in life. You shared, the passing of your father, a couple of years ago. That is, do you have tips on how to manage that from your own experience as well, from a broader, because I think that this is an anniversary thing, right? So as we express this, it's the understanding that this is something that you're feeling year over year over year. Certainly you don't only miss your father around Christmas, but it's heightened around Christmas. How has working through that evolved for you?
I think it's been a challenge, right? I think one of the things is that there's emotions that are going to come up. I mean, you have to allow yourself to feel those emotions and work through that. Part of it is maybe to do some Christmas traditions that we used to do. It might be to throw on a piece of music, right? There's some sadness that can come with that, but also helps me to reflect on some of the good times ultimately that we had. So I look at those things. But it's a challenge. I think also what's important and we've talked about this through the course of a number of these podcasts is the ability to have the conversation, to talk about it, right? To reach out to someone close to you, that kind of thing. They may be sharing that grief as well, right? And to share that this is what's going on for you. And, we've talked about it. Ultimately, community and connection are two of the key things that help people when they're struggling. And so it's also a part where, I'll talk about it. And I think for other people that have experienced the same things, there's a shared understanding of what that might look like. But it's difficult. Like when I think of my dad and I think about the loneliness piece, like, my parents were married for 50 years. And my mom, passed on before, my dad did. And I remember taking him into the hospital for some physical health concerns. And one of the questions that was asked of him are, how are you doing mentally? Are you depressed? That kind of thing. And he said, yeah, I lost my best friend of 50 years. I've been depressed. There's no doubt about that. And I think about that in the holidays. We talk about this issue of loneliness, right? We know 1 in 10 people experience profound loneliness. We know for half of that group, there's a higher risk of developing a mental illness. And so it becomes then, what are some of the things that, during the holidays, if you're alone, either by choice or by circumstances, what are some of the things that you can do to cope and manage with that, right? And there's a number of things, like to treat yourself, ultimately cook a meal for yourself, go out and see a movie, serve in the community, right? Whether that's to go and say volunteer at the food bank, or help serve a Christmas dinner for those that are less fortunate. Like, those are things that you can do to manage some of that, right? And there are lots of people that are looking for social connection, and there's opportunities to reach out and either through the internet or I think, as you had said, the old school method, which is cards and a phone call, reaching out and potentially then trying to ultimately give that gift of time the opportunity to spend time together.
Yeah, exactly. And thank you for touching upon that loneliness piece. We are going to dig a bit deeper on that in a podcast and discuss those elements. And going back to the beginning part of this question, that grief piece, certainly managing your grief doesn't, grief can come up any time of the year. And so I think part of that is also ensuring that you're managing your grief year round, and kind of that early intervention or that prevention piece, so that it's not something that gets socked away. And when you have an anniversary of a holiday or what have you, or a special day, it comes up on you. So I think that's an important factor as well.
Holidays, birthdays, anniversaries, those are all times when you're more likely to experience that grief, right? And so ultimately having a plan and I think reaching out when that comes up is ultimately important. And if it gets past the point of a conversation with a friend and there's more, we look at, again, some of those resources that are available if we're looking to, or if there's a need for counseling.
Right.
And then I think the other thing, we've touched on before, and certainly this is aligned with loneliness and sadness, is the reality of that being heightened during the holidays and what that does as far as the risk of suicide. And I think if that's happening for anybody, that's a text or a call to 988. And there's services available 24/7 to have somebody to talk to if you're really, really struggling.
Great. Thank you for that. We're talking about, I think the way that we've done this podcast has helped to kind of break down that idea of the expectations of Christmas, because I don't think, or the holiday season, we mostly spoke about Christmas, is talking about the grief, the loneliness, the significant struggles that folks can have this time of year. Again, there's that expectation that it's supposed to be merry, it's supposed to be jubilant, and it can be, and it is for some. It doesn't have to be an either or. Sometimes it's combined. It's a high emotion time. So thank you for ending on that note. We had tons of information, including the information you just shared, some of the tips as well. We will compile and we'll put on the Way Forward podcast presented by Beem Credit Union. That is going to be on the website at cmhakelowna.org, as you well know. Thank you so much, Mike.
Thank you.
Beem Credit Union is proud to be a part of communities all across BC, with over 50 branches and insurance offices dedicated to supporting your financial journey. Beem understands financial wellness means something different to everyone, and they're here to help you achieve your unique goals. Whether you're saving for the future, planning your next big step, or just looking for peace of mind, Beem Credit Union is by your side. GFCU Savings, Gulf and Fraser, Interior Savings, and North Peace Savings are trade names of Beem Credit Union.